Okay. I'll go to my next slide quickly. So thank you everyone for attending my talk. And thank you, Michael and Subit, for giving me an opportunity to present my research. So I'm an assistant professor in MAE since 2016. This is an encore. I have actually given this talk, parts of this talk earlier. And essentially, my talk today is about using metamaterials for mechanical and structural applications. And my lab is actually it's called the Complex Structures and Mechanics of Solids Lab. So in the name itself, the main theme is there, which is how to harness complexities for kind of getting the kind of high performance properties that we seek for. And my research areas are mostly in and around solids, which could be architectured at different length scales, modeling these structures, modeling the processes that cause or that lead to these kind of architectured structures. So essentially 3D printing. My methods are both computational and experimental with some custom manufacturing. So that's one area I would be seeking collaborations would be on helping me manufacture some of these things. The experimental facilities that I have in my lab are mechanical testing, low speed impact testing, and we recently have, in collaboration with Dr. Sita Raghavan, have capability to actually do in situ stress corrosion testing for very small coupon sizes. We also have facilities for 3D printing in our lab, but mostly polymer. My teaching focus can be actually divided into two parts. In undergraduate, I teach mostly dynamics, which includes basic dynamics, dynamics of machinery, whereas at the graduate level, my focus shifts to mechanics and mathematics. And I've been very fortunate that my research has been supported by NSF, multiple grants, including the NSF Career Grant. And I have been also very fortunate to have great collaborators for the research I do, including Dr. Raghavan, Dr. Kapat, and my research efforts have led to many journal publications, news coverage. I'll be very happy to share most of it if people are interested. And I will jump right on from here to basic motivation and challenge for my research, and kind of seek out people who would be interested to collaborate to help me with some of the challenges that I'm going to highlight. So the main thesis of my research is actually to find out materials with very unique and programmable property combinations. So a lot of words here. What we mean is typical materials do not have the kind of combination of properties, for example, lightweightedness with very high strength, or even properties which can change over time and loading envelopes. And we want to address that because they are important for, if you look at this page, at the top row are structures which can actually morph. They can include robotics, rehabilitation assistance. Then there are wings that can actually change their shape depending on the regime of aerodynamic performance. And then there are other structures where we want to tailor the properties depending on our requirements. So for example, the second row is about space. So you can see on the left side, this is a satellite which has a very lightweight core inside. You can see these trusses and network of trusses running through them. So that gives you very high strength for very low weight, very good damping properties and things like that. Or for example, if you want to build, the next picture is actually a schematic for building colonies on, say, Mars or Moon. You want to actually be able to make structures with as little material processing as possible, and with properties which can amplify what you already have on those planets. Similarly, you have other challenges, for example, architecturing the outside of a structure to prevent, for example, fouling. There's a ship that has fouled. So how can we do that? How can we approach this problem to remove these kind of challenges? Or, for example, prevent corrosion. So we want to use a combination of materials and their topology or the geometry to arrive at this. So essentially what we are talking about is by leveraging topology, which is a code word for additive manufacturing or advanced manufacturing. So for example, we are looking at surfaces which could be architectured, for example, almost like scales on a fish or snake, and then use that to get splates and shells and filaments that can have programmable properties, which could be programmed in through 3D printing. And that could be used to kind of tailor the performance of these structures, the stiffness of these structures, depending on individual humans or patients, or what the robot wants to do, or the size that. And similarly, if you want to design lightweight cores for the satellite that I showed, we are looking into these network of structures. For example, this one has a negative Poisson's ratio. So if there are any expansion forces, for example, thermal expansion, etc., the negative Poisson ratio will lead to high tolerances. Okay, so high thermal tolerances. So see, you can use these, you can test these in the lab, you can sandwich them and create these lattice core structures, which could find applications potentially to the various lightweight material applications. Similarly, we also work on actually developing very sophisticated models to kind of understand the behavior. For example, this is actually a stress corrosion model where we try to understand how the corrosive, how failure can happen due to corrosion. So more on this later. But before I go any further, I would like to say, what is this fundamental challenge? This looks quite good. So if we can leverage topology, we should be able to solve these problems. So what is the state of the art right now? So the state of the art is still, we have a lot of ground to cover, and it is not easy. Success is not inevitable. And the reason for that is pictorially, visually, I would like to give you a certain kind of a visual landscape of the challenges. So first challenge is actually the number of, since we are dealing with materials and the topology, the design space is actually vast. This is what we call the combinatorial design space. That is, as you increase the number of variables, there are multiple ways in which they can come together along with the loads and give you a possible configuration space which you cannot traverse that easily. So it needs automation right there. Okay, so that's the first big challenge, whether you use analytical modeling or machine learning or any other technique. So this is the first insurmountable barrier. Second one is you cannot use purely testing based strategy because the cost actually also increases exponentially. So this ratio is actually the capital L, as you see on the screen, is the ratio of the part length, and small l is the feature length. So the feature length, as more and more intricate the structure is, the parts costs are very, very large. So you cannot actually just go ahead and just build a structure, many of them, and do your testing. So that's not feasible either. Your computation. So if you take more and more unit cells, which are the repeating units of these structures, even the computing runtime is very huge. So even naive direct numerical simulation is not going to work beyond a few unit cells. Similarly, what about models? If you do use linear models, very quickly your errors, depending on as the loads increase, your errors are going to go out of control. So we are now facing a kind of a challenge from all sides. So we need a strategy that can flatten this curve, okay, these insurmountable barriers. And that is a central challenge, if you ask me, of this field, is how to take care of all four of these and move forward. So essentially, whenever we do a processing of a conventional material, we have the process that leads to a structure, the order length, a structural length, and then you make a component out of it, and you get the response. So typically, the microstructure is at a very, very different length scale than the length scale of the system. So that's why, for example, if you are making an aluminum beam, then the microstructure is the length of it's grain boundaries. So it's micrometers to say a meter. So it's a very, very well separated length scale. And so a lot of averaging that we learn in our strength of materials, mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, civil engineering, all of that works. But when we bring in the architecture, when we bring in an intermediate length scale, this process expands. And now you have a process that leads to a structure. That structure, for example, a filament of a 3D printer, or the resin that will give you a 3D printed structure. So that base material has its own structure. You make it undergo another process, say 3D printing, to give you the architecture, and then there is a response. So now you have three length scales, where the original one may be very small, but now you have an intermediate length scale, which is only barely less than the part length scale. So that actually, it turns out, complicates our problem quite a bit. So now the overall response is not coming from the microstructure, but from the mesostructure. So that is actually a very big problem, and also an opportunity. So developing models that connect process, architecture, and response is the key. So that's basically what we will try to do. Another thing I wanted to note is, this is not I'm showing you a very linear pathway, process, structure, process, architecture, response. In reality, this is not linear. So it is you select a certain process for a certain architecture, and that itself changes the microstructure. So it's all kind of coupled into each other. So that's kind of the challenging landscape that that we have. So some of the projects which target to which I have targeted. So the first project I want to talk about are actually programmable architecture on the external side. So a lot of metamaterial, which is basically materials which have a meta structure to it. That's exactly what I said. Are actually bulk in nature. It's throughout the third dimension. But very little, attention has been paid to architecture on the surface, and this fact actually has been acknowledged by the fluids community, by the interfacial community, by the chemical community who does catalysis and things like that. The surfaces do have a role. Typically, in mechanics and structures, we haven't paid that much attention yet. So my research is actually to look into the effect of architecture on the surface. So this is my 2 NSF grants are there, about $800,000 on this, are to actually understand the role of these surface architectures in changing the mechanical property. So we have discovered nonlinear architecture property relationships. We think that the variable stiffnesses that we get from these could be used in smart wearable skins, tunable stiffness structures for aerospace applications, for soft robotics. So we are actually just finishing up more on the sciencey side and moving more on the application side. So the approach that we use is a combination approach. So we use multi-scale modeling, we use nonlinear finite elements, nonlinear elasticity, and then we have our own lab set up where we do tests to kind of see how far we are off from these, from the behavior, from the low displacement behavior, from emergent properties, that is, properties that were not there in the constituents, either the scales themselves or the membranes. They themselves do not possess the kind of properties that together they would possess. So we kind of characterize them, we identify them. We have published quite a number of papers on these findings, and we hope that we continue to work on this ongoing project. So we will continue to work on that. Another project that I want to talk about is actually with my former colleague, Andrew Dickerson. And here we again look at patterned surfaces, but here the surfaces are actually inspired from the fur of animals. So we want to see if a particulate flow goes through it, can we arrest fouling? So we have found that there are natural animals that don't get fouled that easily. So why is that? So we believe in our hypothesis that it's the fluid structure interaction at multiple length scales that prevent these particle entrapment. And our experiments and some of our simple singular fiber models are actually, they're converging now, and they're showing how there's an intricate link between how the fibers deform and how the deposition takes place and how the fluid gets contoured. And we believe that this will actually lead to more anti-fouling surfaces, or we can actually pinpoint what causes the fouling to be more or less, and so that we can actually either design filters or we can design anti-fouling surfaces, and we can optimize it and design those kind of surfaces. So this is actually work still in progress. The project will end soon, and we are still writing up papers on this, but we believe there is a lot of scope here to actually produce these surfaces, or to look at different kinds of fur mimics, different kinds of nanowires and things like that, and or fibers or fabrics that could actually do something similar. So this is the NSF project I'm talking about. In view of time, I will quickly move to the other project that we have, and this was a DARPA project with COPI with Dr. Raghavan. And here we are actually looking at stress corrosion cracking. That is, what could we do? What kind of coating or what kind of treatment can actually prevent stress corrosion from initiating? So we were actually interested in the very, very beginning stages of stress corrosion. Now, stress corrosion is a highly multi-physical coupled mechanochemical process. So our approach is actually to design thermodynamically consistent models that can help us pinpoint, along with experiments, what causes what aspect of corrosion. So this is a formidable challenge, and we have written one paper up, and we're now again up for more results, and I will be happy to actually talk to people who would be interested in this work. So this is another project that we have, which is actually a modeling experimental approach to stress corrosion cracking. We are grateful to UCF for supporting some of the aspects of this project. We got an internal grant to set up a very sophisticated micro scale experiment, in situ experiment, that can tell us exactly how the kinetics of corrosion and what are the various factors that lead to corrosion. So the last project that is not yet funded, but we are still working. I'm very excited about this project, and I hope I get some interest from the space community is actually using metamaterials to kind of work on austere environments. That is, for example, extraterrestrial binder jet additive manufacturing. And here I'm being helped by students of Dr. Raghavan, Dr. Kapat, Dr. Seal, and definitely acknowledgement from the Exolith lab, Dr. Dan Britz. And what we did, we just submitted our first work, is to actually use some of the very simple binders, for example, salt or brine binders, which we could find in extraterrestrial environments, and try to see if we can actually come up with 3D printing processes that can make it actually even possible. So here we have used salt binder, we have done 3D digital image correlations, we are trying to develop material models that can tell us whether how much strength the material has. And what we found out is actually you can, with a simple brine solution, get pretty reasonable strength. So you can actually use this for very intricate. So we are now, the next step would be to actually design these 3D printers that can do it. And we had undergraduate students, thanks to Kurt Strusu's help, who were actually designing these Exolith 3D printers. So if we can make this, it will be pretty revolutionary. It's not meant to compete with building materials as such, but any functional parts, if you could make using Regolith. So looking future, there are two areas in which I'm focusing. One is energy, for example, materials for hydrogen economy or decarbonization. So corrosion work directly leads to, corrosion is primarily hydrogen embrittlement is very important there. So I'm actually trying to deepen my understanding of hydrogen embrittlement. That would allow me again to design the kind of material structure combinations that could help us in mitigating corrosion. So that's one aspect that I'm working on. I'm also working on reducing weight of materials, giving more multifunctionality of these materials for new types of aerospace applications, handling, transportation, and things like that. So that adds to soft lightweight autonomous materials. So that's one focus area. I have already worked with MSc people, professors from chemistry or nanocenter, formally or informally, on these projects. Would like to expand my collaboration. Another thing is I'm focusing on space. So for example, manufacturing in austere environments, can metamaterials help us tide some of the challenges that we have in these environments? So for that, we need to master the 3D printing process under extraterrestrial environments. So that's ground testing, process optimization, predictions. We are developing models to that. This is more of a nascent project. We are still looking to expand. And obviously, we are looking for robotics for, lightweight robotics for space applications or planetary environment. Would love to work with, people at material science, planetary science, civil engineering. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. It's actually people with whom I've already interacted with for these projects. I'm very happy to actually collaborate with people across discipline. So thank you very much. I would like to acknowledge NSF, Department of Energy, Siemens, who has worked on multiple projects, on the robotics project, on 3D printing projects. Some of them found the inspiration for other projects that I have done. DARPA, obviously, my existing collaborators, Sita, Jay, Andrew, and of late Sudipta. So thank you very much, Subit. I will be happy to take any questions from it.